All right. Good evening, everybody. We're just a minute after 6, so I'd like to get started. Welcome to the third webinar in our series, our webinar series that's related to our research work being done on the project of demonstration of innovative pasture rejuvenation practices in central and northern interior of BC. And tonight is focus on sod-seeding as a tool for pasture rejuvenation. And we are lucky to be joined by Dr. Bart Lardner out of the University of Saskatchewan to share his experience and his knowledge on utilizing this practice for pasture rejuvenation. I would like to acknowledge that we wouldn't be here today without the support of a huge collaborative group of funding. So I'd like to acknowledge that we are funded through the Farm Adaptation Innovator Program, FAIP, through the Climate and Agriculture Initiative of BC, as well as receiving funding from the Canadian Forage and Grassland Association and the Northern Development Initiative Trust. So a lot of different groups coming in to make this happen tonight and over the last few years, and very appreciative of that support. Bart, would you like to introduce yourself, or would you like me to say a few words? As a presenter, I usually like to start by introducing myself, so I always give that as an option.
Yeah, a few words about myself. Well, I guess I've been originally from BC, and great to talk to a bunch of BC folks, stakeholders, producers, and I see the usual suspects are online tonight, and including some bandits from Alberta. Anyway, great. Thank you for the invitation. Yeah, we farmed up in the Peace River country, Dawson Creek, for many years, my father, myself, and then I wandered out here to Saskatchewan in about 1984. And, you know, push came to shove, and here I am sitting on both sides of the fence. So I do a lot of research related to producer questions, and certainly extension has been a big part of my program. And so jump at the opportunity to talk to folks and whatever topic it might be. So I'll start my presentation here, and hopefully you can see that on your screens.
Yeah, it's not full screen. Oh, so it is full screen, but we're seeing the presenter side. So I think there's just, if you hit the display settings on the top, and then you can hit switch monitor.
Oh, okay.
There you go, swap presenter, and there you go. Looks great.
All right, good. Yeah, so I'm a prof here in the Department of Animal and Poultry Science in University of Saskatchewan. Been out here, as I said, since about 84, but really involved in research since about 1998. So I do date myself, and I'll talk about some of those previous trials that we did over those years. And quite active on social media, and hopefully it's, in my mind, Twitter is a tool to just get those results out there. So feel free to follow me. My whole program over the last 25 years has been about applied beef and forage systems research, and so really focused on the cow-calf sector, to do with breeding female, to do with that wean calf, backgrounding that animal, but certainly forages are a big part of that program, and annual and perennial forages, and have been lucky to work with a lot of the folks I heard you mention that are going to come up after on some of your presentations. And Joseph, I want to get down there and pick his brain in Eastern Canada and Syria. Bruce Coleman, we have Bill Billigatoo out here now. So all the forage breeder folks are key to you as producers. And so we try to do the research and look at the applicability of these new germplasms in a pasture or paddock setting, and then talk about how they're going to work on your farm or your ranch. As I said, I've been in a research setting at Lanigan, Saskatchewan, actually, for 25 years, Tremendous Research Ranch, about an hour and a half east of Saskatoon. And just about 2018, about 2 years ago, we started to relocate to our new site at Clavet, about 20 minutes off campus, in a new land base and new buildings and new facilities under a model called Livestock Forage Center of Excellence. And so we're just getting that program moved over and transitioned up here in 2020 and 2021, and looking at doing a bunch more applied forage research studies. So tonight, the question was, and your ask was for me to talk about rejuvenation. And, you know, ironically, I did my graduate work on this many years ago. And so it's a topic that comes up, and everywhere I talk about this across Canada, down in the US, it's one that always comes up. Because why? Because, you know, we spend a lot of time, hopefully, trying to get that perennial land base into production, doing everything right. But then sometimes we fail to manage and monitor it, and it starts to reduce in yield and quality. And then we're looking for some, you know, magic solution, or maybe some low cost rejuve technique after that 5, 8, 10, 12, 20-year time span. And so that's, you know, really what some of the alternatives that are out there. And so I'm going to talk about some of those alternatives that are out there. Focus, you know, mostly on sod seed at the back end of my talk here, and a little bit about a couple of studies that we did, myself and Dr. Paul Jefferson, as well as some of my graduate students, Bree Kellen and Tess Mills. So, you know, I think you need to back up and look at why would you think about rejuvenating? Well, looking at existing vegetation and some of the options for improvement. Okay, so we know we're establishing that perennial stand over a 2-year period, and so over time you may see a depression or a reduction in yield. Obviously, there's plant communities or elastic communities. They're always in transition. Okay, there's always desirable vegetation and there's undesirable species moving in. So this is actually a slide I need to reference from my friend Al Foster up there at Tisdale, and basically it's a flow chart. And desirable vegetation, yes, can we manage it with grazing and maybe hay production? Or can we manipulate that on an annual program with fertility, maybe aeration? Maybe we can come in with a herbicide to suppress some invasive woody species. Or I've done a lot of work on this winter feeding programs to try and look at nutrient cycling and rejuvenate those tired old pastures. But we look at maybe some other alternatives that are out there. Sod seed certainly is one that's attractive and looked at many times. Overseeding as well. And then, you know, if you have an undesirable situation where you know, if the community has moved away from those decreased or productive species to maybe just invasive species or invader species, and so we just do a drastic, you know, reset and break and reseed. So what are some of those options that are out there? I'll touch on some of them. Breaking and reseeding, a last ditch option I suggest. You know, you got to look at what's out there. Fertility, mechanical, overseeding, and then certainly some of the sod seeding options that are out there. All right, so, you know, you look at your pasture, and my idea, obviously you do a drive-by or walk about, and that's really why I get a feel for those different stands. And so, you know, you can look at what's the presence of productive species, what's the presence of unwanted species, is there some aspen encroachment, is there some absent wormwood, some leafy spurge, you know, are we seeing maybe a potential here? Do we have 20-30% desirable species to justify me coming in there and maybe trying to move that to a desirable percentage of those wanted high quality forages? What's our objective? Are we trying to increase biomass, or maybe we're just trying to maybe increase quality? And we'll talk about that a little bit more. You need to look at where's that site. You know, is it on a hillside? Is it in a valley? Is it on a mountainside? What's the soil zone are you in? What's the soil structure, right? Do you get adequate rainfall? Do you not? Is it maybe a sensitive site, sandy soil, right? You know, lots of depressions, maybe solonetzic soils or something like that. And of course, this is a big one, is that presence of maybe you've got a problem situation or a non-management situation for years and years, and then you're going to come in and try and hopefully fix it with maybe a rejuve option or maybe a sod seed option, when guess what, there's maybe too much competition. And the other thing I always get asked, and we're talking about, I just mentioned aspen encroachment, but maybe there's, you know, snowberry or western snowberry or something like that, or Elaeagnus, wolf willow. You know, how do we how do we suppress these unwanted woody species, let alone those broadleaves that move in? I guess the real question, and I throw this slide up, is because hopefully that's not what your pasture looks like. That actually is a pasture out of the Aspen Parkland up around that Melfort country. And you know, you see some bad things happening in this picture. You see some aspen encroachment taking over where you could be productive forage species for your grazing ruminants, but also you see in the a lot of pussy toes, I guess we call them, they're a red flag species. And so there's been a bunch of improper grazing management on this particular pasture over successive years. And so there are these red flag species, pasture sage, prairie sage, or a couple other ones that show up and say, okay, guess what? Maybe we have some problem issues going on here. And I just want to touch on some grazing issues. And so here's just an example of, will rejuvenation benefit this pasture? And you look on the left side of that fence, and those the smart cows are on the right side of the fence, by the way, because they've actually figured out ditch grazing is going to give them forage quality versus the left side of the fence. And so I'm looking at a lot of rocks and a lot of you know, bare ground, and maybe maybe a sod seed's not the action here. Maybe it's a break and reseed. And so poor grazing management is just putting stress on those species above ground, below ground. We know that. And, you know, nature abhors a vacuum. And by golly, something else is going to move in when you stress those desirable species with overgrazing or successive defoliations on that same plant without adequate rest in between. And this is a really good picture. It's in multiple publications, and it just shows a rough fescue plant clipped at various heights. On the left, obviously no clipping, but over on the right-hand side, you can see they clipped it down to 1.5 inches stubble left at 4-week intervals. And so what you do above ground is going to certainly affect below ground. And so, you know, sometimes our rejuve alternatives or options we're looking at are good, and they might come in and they might solve the problem in the short term, but the long term, in my opinion, is probably implementing good grazing management going forward. I did mention a few terms here just a minute ago, decreaser, increaser, invader species. It's just some rangeland terms, and decreaser species are those species that we want to see present in our stands. Those are the ones, the desirable ones that will go away with improper stocking rates, and they're replaced then by the increaser species, those that are more grazing tolerant. And if we continue to increase or have improper stocking rates, we will see loss of decreaser, loss of increaser, and just those invasive species like thistles and like you know, pasture sage and absence wormwood and nodding thistle. And so yeah, we don't want to go down that path. Break and reseed, it is that, you know, invasive, and it's a very costly because you're taking that acre out of production for that 1 year. You know, if it's a perennial, coming back to a perennial forage, then you're going to be losing that production off that acre of land. You are setting yourself up for risk. Yeah, it can be the most costly. Yes, we'll release nutrients. And maybe a situation where there is just a lot of, you know, invasive woody species, or you've got a lot of acres that maybe is taken over 5, 10 years, and maybe it's just the only way you can actually change that forage type that's out there. I'll just touch on fertility as a way of rejuvenation. Obviously, we should be looking at our perennial stands and soil testing and treating them like our cash crops. Coming from a forage guy, I'm quite passionate about that. But yeah, laying out some granular or some liquid fertility is certainly an option. Grasses love N and P, and legumes they love phosphorus and sulfur. But it is also very moisture dependent, and you need to be working with your cost ruler and looking at, is this something I should be doing, especially if there's less than 30% productive species. You're just basically fertilizing your weeds. And usually a 1 year response. I go back to some really, some data that actually I think this is some of Dwayne McCartney's data. And so just showing you some of the work that was done along the Aspen Parkland throughout Saskatchewan in the brown, dark brown, blackberry wooded soil zones. And here we have either a direct application of N or maybe a combination of N and P. And then you can see the unfertilized, that column there, biomass yield unfertilized, and then comparing it to the biomass response with that fertility of just 50 pounds of nitrogen. Or maybe we actually throw in a little bit of phosphorus and we see a synergistic or stacking effect. And so that's something you look at when you do your soil test, is say, okay, what is my soil lacking? Am I going to see a response? Is it cost effective to put that level of N or P or maybe even S out there? You really have to do the math if you're going to go down this road. So yeah, fertility, usually from all the work I did, you do those heavy applications, it's moisture dependent and you may see a 1-year response. There may be some carryover, but usually, it is very moisture dependent. This is just a shot of different fertility application rates, and you can see that this is obviously a small plot study looking at some different fertility rates on a grass stand, and you can see that certainly, as I said, grasses love nitrogen. What's the expected yield increase per pound of N applied? And I think you can find this chart anywhere as well. And so you look at, say 25 pounds of N applied for every pound of N that goes on. We're looking at maybe a 27-pound dry matter biomass, equivalent to 675 pounds. We double that, okay? So we're going to get a doubling of the biomass, but then we see the, diminishing returns here. And so all of a sudden, for every pound we put on, we're only getting 24 pounds of dry matter yield at that 75 pounds rate. And obviously, maybe there's something going on here. Maybe it's not going to make a lot of sense for us to go out and double that to 100 pounds of N per acre, just because of the law of diminishing returns. So yeah, I guess, and this can go along with sod seeding as well, is that when you're thinking about that, you're thinking about what am I going to sod seed, maybe is an option to maybe apply some type of nutrient just to kickstart that little seedling and get it going against the existing species that are already present in that old stand. And so liquid fertility, yeah, make sure you're placing it there in the root zone. And so a big benefit. But pencil these costs for fertility application very carefully. Do that soil test, work with your agronomists, your reps, whatever you can, pick their brain for sure. Now I'm going to go back to some, this is not sod seeding work, but it is mechanical rejuvenation work. And it was just simply a chisel cultivator that we used, a 3/4 inch spike. And this is some work we did a long time ago. You can see the date on there. And we had a really long established crested wheatgrass stand at Lanigan, just straight crested wheatgrass. And it was really not yielding anymore. And we either was going to break and reseed. We know that's very costly, or let's just go out there and maybe just look at some rejuve options. So can we go in with a mechanical application with a 3/4 inch spike with a cultivator, with or without that 50 pounds of N or 100 pounds of N? And you can see the response in terms of, here's our control, okay, and that was our yield. And so everything beyond that with that spiking, it did what that disturbing that 2, 3, 4 inches of that soil profile, it just liberates those nutrients, right? And it just allows some of them to start to mobilize and be there for those grass species that are present. But you also remember there's always a seed bank in your pasture system. And sometimes we'll wake up the nasty ones. And so sometimes we'll see an increase in some of those unwanted species as well when we're going in with a mechanical application. But you can see, yeah, you know what? At the end of the day, I think we could suggest that maybe we could go in with that 3/4 inch knife and maybe throw on 50 pounds of N on that 30-year-old crested wheatgrass pasture and see a desirable response, as well as possibly see some response in those grasser cattle that we threw out there. Herbicides, I'll just touch on them. That is another option in my mind. It's a last ditch effort. It's expensive. We did a lot of this work up at Pathlow with Al Foster over the many years ago. We looked at all those different products. We looked at actually some grazon products at Lanigan with some of the Sask ag reps as well. And you know, if you have a pasture with a lot of woody species, it may be an option, but you have to come back and you have to, you know, sit down with your calculator, and you have to realize that it's not going to be a cheap option. And it also is going to take out those broadleafs, right? So if there's any alfalfa in your pasture, it's going to be gone. But again, you know, it may be a last ditch effort that's out there. I'll just mention overseeding, because overseeding certainly comes up in many conversations. It comes up in many producer workshops. I've heard it over the years. We just put a little bit of legume seed in our mineral mix for our critters, and they will scatter it around throughout our pastures. And guess what? Some of those seeds, maybe, I don't know, less than 5% might germinate. And over time, if you've got lots of time on your hands, you might see establishment of some of these through this overseeding method of getting out there, you know. And certainly, in my mind, overseeding and sod seeding, it's the option is there, and the option usually should be a legume, be it alfalfa or your clovers, or I'll talk a little bit about some of the non-bloat legumes that we've done some work with. So yeah, overseeding, you know, it is something that we hear a lot about. I've not done any work in this area, but certainly it is a lot of producers have tried it and they've had some success, and some other producers have been not so successful. Okay, let's talk about sod seeding. And you know, and actually it was probably 7 years ago that Syria and I were in the back of a meeting in Olds, Alberta, and so henceforth I'll talk about what one of our research studies because of that. And so a lot of times it's being in the right place at the right time. We're able to put together a study and maybe, you know, generate some information that's useful for producers and useful for the industry. So sod seeding is, in my mind, getting a legume established into possibly a straight grass pasture, or maybe a grass legume pasture. And you may go in there, you may look at suppressing the existing species, because competition is everything. Or you might even want to kill the existing species, right? And just totally change the whole dynamics of the species composition. And really two options here. Your timing is you're going to do this activity in the spring or early summer, right? Or that sod seeding event I'm talking about. Or maybe you're going to come in and do that fall seeding, or that frost seeding we call it. So, you know, and you're going to manage your pasture your site accordingly. You're going to probably need specialized equipment, and every line of machinery has, you know, different brands. And John Deere, I know I've used a 15-foot John Deere no-till drill with Ducks Unlimited. We did a bunch of sod seeding with those folks. I'll talk about another a piece of equipment that we use for some of our work, but certainly you need to probably look at specialized equipment. And you know, what's your objectives? And so, as I said, you're probably looking at trying to suppress or kill that existing vegetation. And I will say this is the #1 factor that has to take place for you to be successful, and that is a timely rainfall right after you do it. And I had a horseshoe somewhere, because I tell you, I got lucky many times. And moisture, look at your long-term weather patterns, and okay, I'm going to go out there and sod seed in that 3rd week of June or something like that, because we're going to look at getting some rainfall shortly thereafter. So moisture. Ensure this presence of productive species. I don't want to be going out there and sod seeding into a stand where I only see 10% of productive species and 20% of woody species, and you know, 40% of invasive species. So obviously you want to do a pasture walk and check what's out there before I'm going to go up and and get the equipment together, get the legume seed together, and go out there and sod seed. As I said, you know, suppress that existing stand. You know, if you can get your hands on an unselected herbicide, in our case, we did not, but we just used glyphosate. But you know, it really is all about the amount per acre you put on there. We also looked at ways and means of suppressing existing species, and so I just had our ranch manager go out there in the fall and graze it hard, graze that stand, that area, put a lot of critters out there, because my objective was to come in the next spring and establish those legume species and allow them the best environment to germinate and to, you know, lay down roots and to grow over the next 60, 70, 80 days with timely rains. And so you might graze hard the fall prior to application. You might then, or maybe come in and graze hard in the spring and then use a herbicide late summer, and then maybe fall or frost seed, you know, depending on your timing. And every farm or ranch is a different case study. It's not going to be one size fits all. And so you need to walk through all these questions and checklists and say, okay, this or this may not work for me, depending on my you know, labor demands or my timing or where my animals are or all these things. And so you have to do your homework here for sure. As I mentioned, you know, when you're sod seeding, it might be prudent to maybe throw down some type of a nutrient with those seedlings just to get them going. Phosphorus is a suggestion. And, you know, sod seeding, there's a less potential for erosion than going in and breaking up and cultivating and then reseeding in a firm, fine, moist seed bed. But the big thing in my mind is be patient, be patient, be patient. And yeah, do that sod seeding event, and then be patient and wait, you know, look for some rainfall, look for some time to go by before you say it is or it is not a success story, or maybe it's a failure. So a lot of it is, and I'm guilty as charged. I was not patient in some of our sod seeding work, and I couldn't see the results as soon as possible. This is just some fall rye work that we did, and that's what our site looked like. Myself, Paul Jefferson, and we were sod seeding some fall rye into an old crested wheatgrass pasture. And in this case, we suppressed the existing species pretty hard, as you can see. In fact, we killed out most, because we're moving it from a perennial right down to an annual pasture. And with that sod seeding event afterwards. Here's another site we did, myself and Al Foster. This is some work we did up at Pathlow. And so a successful, in my mind, a successful sod seeding event where we saw good germination and good establishment of alfalfa in that stand. Okay, I just want to talk here at the back end of my slide deck here about a couple of studies that we've done at Western Beef Development Center, now Livestock Farm Center of Excellence. And this is some work that Paul Jefferson and myself did. And it was a long established crested wheatgrass pasture. And our objective was was not producing anything worth grazing in June, July, and August. Maybe we can come in and we can actually sod seed. And so we looked at some of these new annual forages. Fall rye was one of them. In my mind, there's three options out there for annual pasture: fall rye, winter wheat, and winter triticale. I've always gone to fall rye because in my mind, it's a very productive species. And we did some work with fall rye on some backgrounding programs I did with Dr. John McKinnon, and it worked quite well, because even in maybe a drier year, fall rye will work better than Italian ryegrass. Okay, so I've always liked it. It might be an annual, but it kind of acts like a biennial, and I get maybe just some late summer fall grazing, but I'll also get maybe some spring grazing out of it the next year. And this Prima fall rye has been around for many, many years. This was a new cultivar out of the Swift Current program called Hazlet. And so you can see that was our equipment we used. That's the agro plow. And how did I get involved with agro plow? I go back to Graham Finn. This is when he was running around the country peddling this. And so, you know, that looked to me like the right thing to be sod seeding with, being a piece of equipment coming out of Australia, seeding into droughty type pastures. So we sod seeded this old crested wheatgrass pasture with fall rye. And you can see a 30-acre pasture sprayed liter and a half Roundup, June 15, and then came in and seeded July 15. We threw a little bit of N out there, yeah, for sure, because you know, fall rye likes nitrogen, just like most grass species. And then we looked at yield and quality. This is why did we choose this particular piece of equipment? Because of this inverted T-boot. And there you can see it, is it opens up that soil profile, it drops that seed into an inverted T, and then it folds back, and there's good soil to seed contact with that seed behind that that drill. And in my mind, if there's good soil to seed contact, there's going to be good moisture uptake, good water absorption, high potential for germination with that little seedling to get it up and get it going and competing against any of those old species that were not killed with that suppression activity. August 31, okay, we seeded July 17. There we go, nearly, 40 days later. Pretty good growth, and there we are seeding grazing our fall rye seeded, sod seeded pasture that fall, and pretty good quality, as you can see, 19 protein and 65 TDN. And biomass was about 2,000 pounds per acre. Critters used it quite nicely, and we had about 2 weeks of grazing that particular fall with 234 cows. And we came back and actually grazed it the following spring. So, you know, it was just an option to maybe take that tired old stand of crested wheatgrass and come in and sod seed with an annual forage. Okay, I'll just talk about the last set of slides here about introducing a legume species into a stand with sod seeding activities. Legumes, in my mind, are should be part of your program, whether you're established with perennial forage, but certainly sod seeding, because, you know, nitrogen's 80% of the atmosphere, and these guys fix nitrogen. And certainly, you know, use legumes and livestock. It's a systems approach, and we can't get enough of them, in my mind. What's the first one we think about? Then that's alfalfa. And so, yes, you know, if you're looking at sod seeding a legume into your stand, maybe alfalfa might be an option. What is the variety that's going to work for you? But you know what? It does cause that frothy bloat, and you know, Dr. Bernie Goplin years ago said there's more money lost with the fear of grazing alfalfa for the fear of bloat than actually producers actually getting it into their pastures and trying it. So, you know, if we have alfalfa in our pasture and trying to reduce that incidence of bloat, we can use these, you know, low bloat varieties, AC Grazeland BR, or maybe the water additives, the blow clear. You know, there's options out there. But in our case, we're having that conversation, Surya and I, back in Olds, Alberta, 6-7 years ago. And can we sod seed and unbloat legumes? And guess what, Surya? Can you give me some of your newest, latest, greatest? And so the two that we looked at were obviously some of the work that Surya was looking at was the Sandfoin. That's the AC Mountain View. And why Sandfoin unbloat? Because it has these condensed tannins. And the other option obviously was out there was the Sicer milk vetch, the Oxley, the reticulate vein pattern caught, you know, that's why we call it an unbloat legume. But there was not a lot of work looking at these non-bloats in a sod seed situation. And so this is my grad student, Bree Kellen. Some of you may know Bree. She's just wrapping up, trying to write up her PhD thesis as we speak. But her whole objective was to look at sod seeding an existing legume grass pasture, i.e. it was a metabrome alfalfa grass stand that we had seeded way back in 1998. And it had been losing yield and quality. And so can we improve the grazing capacity through maybe sod seeding some of these non-bloaters into this existing pasture stand? So we did that sod seeding activity in June of 2015, and then Bree has been collecting data for 3 years. You can see that 16, 17, and 18. And obviously this was some work we did at Lanigan, Saskatchewan. The site was a black oxbow soil, 75 acres, where we divided it into 15 5-acre paddocks. There's our 3 treatments, where we sod seeded Sandfoin or sod seeded Sicer milk vetch. or our check was a control pasture where there was no sod seeding activity. And then each year we went in and grazed grass or steers, 60 head. So some of the objectives were just to look at, composition. If we went to this, length to try and sod seed, would they actually stay in stand, these non-bolt legumes? And then look at quality, and then maybe measure animal performance. And some of the other work that Bree looked at is obviously we're hearing a lot about enteric emissions from grazing ruminants, and so we'll talk briefly about some of her findings there. As I said, in June of 2015, we suppressed this, and this was a meadow-brome grass alfalfa stand that we had seeded in 1998, and it was sitting about maybe 10% alfalfa, 90% meadow-brome grass. And I came in and I hit it with, a little bit of a low rate of glyphosate, and I really thought that I'd killed it. And then we came, obviously, there's our seeding rates with a sandfoin and slice of milk vetch. And again, we used that agro drill, the 80, it was actually an 8100, because of the earlier work that we'd done with the fall rye study. And there's our site. You can see some pictures of us actually sod seeding there in June of 15. And that was kind of what our stand looked like after the suppression with the glyphosate. And you can see that, there's about half of the meadow-brome grass species are still there. One thing I learned in this particular study is that meadow-brome grass, it's a resilient darn species. And even with a suppression of glyphosate, we did not outright kill it. So we looked at yield, quality, and we measured composition, and we looked at steer performance. But rainfall, it's so important. And you can see that in 2016, we had really nice weather patterns and rainfall events, but we really did come into a drought year in year 2 in 17, and not a lot better in 2018. And you know what? What really, I talked about timely rains in June of 15, we sod seeded, but then in July and August, we got really nice rains in July and August of 2015, and continued rainfall in 2016. So, sometimes you get lucky. Looking at the bot comp of these pastures, and here you can see, here's our slice of milk vetch we measured, here's our sandfoin, and here's our check. And you can see the different colored bars on our columns. And here's our non-bolt legumes, the purple, and the legume, the existing alfalfa that was present, is the green, and the grass is the blue, and other means weedy species, okay? And so in 15, that was presence, and this is measured in the fall, and you can see that was the level of slicer in the fall of 15. Here's the level of sandfoin in the fall of 15. But one thing we really noticed was the increase in slicer over year 2, year 3, and it actually maintained in stand. Whereas our sandfoin, sorry, Syria, it started to decrease, okay? And there's our check. So at the end of the day, you know what? Slicer may be a little bit harder to establish, but it does maintain and stand longer. Sandfoin, you know what? We did tend to see it start to reduce in composition after a 3-year period. Here's the quality of our pasture. You can see pretty good quality, especially for a 600-pound stocker animal needing adequate protein and energy. And this is just quickly some of the performance data of these critters. Here's our sandfoin, our end kilo, start and end, they're all similar weights. And just to summarize, we saw about 60% greater performance from those steers that were on those sod-seeded paddocks compared to our control, which was mainly a lot of grass in those control paddocks. So we just introducing that legume really did help the quality. As I mentioned, grazing ruminants, you know what, they do eructate methane and CO2. We're getting a lot of pushback as a beef industry these days on this. And so Bree's been measuring some of that using an SF6, the sulfur hexafluoride technique. And just briefly, it's the technique helps us measure the actual emissions on these animals out there on a pasture on a daily basis. But kind of a good news story to wrap up this presentation tonight is that what did she find? She found that those steers that were on that Sicer sod-seeded pastures actually had reduced methane emissions compared to our controls. So just to summarize, when we sod-seeded those nun-bloats, obviously quality improved and met the requirements of the grasser cattle. We saw that reflected in terms of increased performance of these animals that were out there. We saw that Sicer maintained composition over successive years better than the Sandpoint, and emissions were decreased as well off those Sicer sod-seeded paddocks. Kathy Larson has been working with me many years. She's our beef economist, and she did some calculations with Brie Kellen and amortized over 10 years. That was the cost to sod seed those nun-bloats into that existing metabrome alfalfa pasture. So just to summarize, if you're thinking of sod seeding, look at your site, maybe put on some grazing pressure to suppress existing species, suppress competition. You think about maybe coming in with some application like a glyphosate to maybe stack that up and then reduce competition to allow those legume seedlings to persist and germinate. And crucial timing with rainfall is everything. Cost versus benefit. Ensure the stand is actually in a deteriorated condition and you can justify that rejuve technique. And as I said, over time, I figure 5, 6, 7 years, potentially the yield of the biomass will decline depending on the soil type, soil structure, soil fertility. Older stands may lack original species comp, right? So, you may be just rejuvenating some of those unwanted species if you don't carefully assess what's out there. And I can't say enough about, comparing cost versus gain and looking at all the risks that are out there. I just want to throw this up. It is a rejuve publication we made many years ago. I think some of the folks online have referred to this, Rejuvenation of Tame Forages, Parklands, and another one for Southern Saskatchewan. Some of the websites that are out there too have a lot of really good information. Beef Research has done a fantastic job of trying to pool together various organizations, Alberta Ag, Rope on the Web, and the Western Beef Development Center. We've got a number of videos on our site there. You can see there, westernbeef.org, and that's just the rejuve videos that we put together.
All right, thank you, Bart. That's excellent information, and I'll make sure I've already written a note to make to anybody who's registered and participating tonight. I'll share those links directly by email